the reports and is like, okay, I understand what's the problem with our system now. The defensive team sees the reports, and not only do they see the reports, they see the logs, the events, the records of the tests that you took out, right? And then they go to secure their system more, so that they now have a report to give higher ups, so that the system is better. Understood? Let's move on. So we have, for the next part, that authorization and scope are non-negotiable. You don't play. Should I stand? You do not play with authorization. Why don't you play with authorization? Because you must get it too. Testing without authorization is illegal. You'll go to jail. Nobody will ask you two questions. Do you understand? You are testing, nutrition testing, right? But you are testing without authorization, you go to jail. Very simple. Or you pay a fine, a very big fine. Or have approval first. Not just have approval, you stay within scope. I've already mentioned all these concepts. So you see why I was speaking a lot earlier, right? You stay within that scope. You don't, oh, well, I also see there's an issue with Gmail. And your own issues with you too. You don't go ahead and be touching Gmail. You understand? You don't. It's not allowed. Unless you are given authorization. You test only the agreed systems during the agreed time. Maybe they tell you you have 2 months to find any issues that you can find within YouTube downloads. And within those 2 months, if you are unable to find any issues, then we can discuss further from there, right? But within those 2 months, or in fact, if you don't even have a like that kind of information, right? That's said within 2 months, within whatever this year, and you go and touch it. You understand? It's very funny. But if you actually genuinely think about it, so many people have had these type of issues where they were even drafted. Like it's their job to do this type of thing. And they just, I see another issue and they went and touch something they're not supposed to touch. And then they entered into issue. You follow the rules of engagement. With following the rules of engagement, you respect the limits on the methods and intensity. All these things are always drafted in a document that you'll be sent, you'll be given. Look, this is your contract. Most of the times, penetration testing comes in contracts. And with those contracts, you know what you can do, what is authorized, what is agreed, when you are agreed that time to perform what you need to agree, right? And with everything, you must document everything. If you do, you must say you did. Do you understand? You can't take a step without having a screenshot proof, a writing document of what you did to get from point A to point B. Not only because the system is trying to limit you from so many other things that they might want to keep hidden because you are probably not even in their system, but also because they want to be able to know how to fix it. Let the defensive team know. Let the CEO know. Let the CISO know. That's the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Imagine you did something now and you didn't tell the chief officer. Yeah. And you didn't tell the chief officer. What's supposed to happen then? You know? I would like to move on, but I would request a break. The break won't be more than 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, so we just finished with the first core concepts of penetration testing under cybersecurity, right? And the next two are more practical than they are theoretical. That was just the whole theoretical aspect of it. The next two will consist of reconnaissance and VMware, VM exploitation rather, right? What's VM? VM is virtual machines. Good. So we're actually going to run through the rest of it because after this, it's more practical than anything else. So let's go. So what is reconnaissance? Reconnaissance is before trying to break into your system, a tester first learns everything useful about that target. That process is it involves information gathering about a system, a network, an organization, a database, a cloud service, a any other type of service, a port, anything that you can currently like find out about your system while you are being given that authorized access to it, right? During that state now, you know your targets, you find out the IP addresses, the domains involved in that, the open ports, the JavaScript files, the PHP files, the XML files, anything you can find is important to you for reconnaissance. And while you are doing the reconnaissance, you start to filter out what might actually not be as important to what you're trying to achieve. The more you understand the targets, the smarter your testing becomes. Because it's important to find as much information and then filter it out, right? That's why you find out more. Do you understand? Moving on, there's two types of reconnaissance. What are the two types? We have a passive reconnaissance and an active one. Passive reconnaissance typically involves no direct contact between you and the system. You typically go for publicly available domains, ports, IP addresses, website, anything that's just open for anybody to see, right? And not just even open, you study the DNS. What's DNS? Domain name system. You study the registration data. Anything that you could find on LinkedIn, right? Maybe about the workers of the system, maybe about social media, like you find them on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on what would I even say? You can find anything anywhere on X, on Twitter, right? Any information you can find about the system might be good information. For example, imagine this. You don't know anything about this system. You're starting off from the beginning of reconnaissance. Within this period, you then see that on their LinkedIn profiles, on some of the engineers that works on the system, they start to say, sorry, let me erase this off. Just worked on learning C++, was able to deploy it into my system, very excited about that. It's just a post, isn't it? And you currently know that the system that they are talking about is the system you are trying to exploit. So you are very much aware that C++ is something you might need. Why? C++ exploitation, things in that regard, something you might need because the person that is currently actively working on the system leads that they are working on that. So you are seeing that as something else. Within this, you leave little to no traces on the targets. Why? Because it's indirect, it's passive, no direct contact. But with active, you are actually having direct contact. You are sending traffic to the target. You know what traffic is now? Information from yourself getting into the system collects the information, gives you back your results as it normally should do. But that traffic can be tracked to your IP address. So you want to be careful about how you work with active reconnaissance because you are scanning for open ports and services. And within that scanning that is passive, but there's also majority of them that are active because the system is very aware of who's trying to enter their system. Maybe. Not all systems are.
This passive, the domain or the people that own that website, or so they're not aware of this.
Typically with the passive, they wouldn't notice that you are trying to get information about them. You understand? The same way you open your WhatsApp, you see some messages, you just saw the message this thing, but you didn't open it, right? But you saw the message is sent. That message is sent now, you've seen it, but they don't know you've seen it. That's passive. Once you click it, you see that double blue tick, active. Make sense? Within active still, you are querying the system directly. The problem with active really is you are leaving traces. It's like Hansel and Gretel. You heard that story where they were trying to go from home to some other random place, and then Hansel was like, okay, let him drop breadcrumbs on the floor so that he can know where he was coming from and where he's going to. You are leaving breadcrumbs with active. If the system is smart enough, if the people involved in the system, and typically systems don't only include your computer system, systems include hardware, include software, include networks, include human factors, right? If any one of these can pick up on those your breadcrumbs, they might block you. You guess. So most likely you would start with a passive attack, maybe move into an active attack. In fact, most likely you would move into an active attack. But you also want to check whether their active defenses are available as a penetration tester. Then with active attacks, you are more accurate because you have actual information that's coming from that system, whether it's from the humans, whether it's from the network, whether it's from the hardware and or the software, but you are more detectable. They can find out those breadcrumbs you've left on the floor to take you from point A to point B. That makes sense? So let's move on. So under reconnaissance, what information exactly are we looking for? We're typically looking for IP addresses, domains, open ports, as I've already mentioned before, services, what type of services that include, okay, you could have web, mail, SSH, versions of those services, and even other leads. There are other things that you could find out using your reconnaissance. So how does a reconnaissance phase typically unfold? You identify the targets, find out who you want, you passively gather the information, things that are open to the internet. You actively scan them. You might get calls, but you get information about ports, services, versions, IP addresses, whatever, and then you map the attack surface. What's the attack surface? It's just everything that is exposed and interesting. Moving on. So reconnaissance in action typically comes out like this. You start from a target, right? What you have, passive lookup, public data, active scan, open ports are revealed. Read the results. After that, you start to exploit. But we're not getting into exploits until we get here. This is the concept 3, vulnerabilities. Vulnerable virtual machines, vulnerable web services, and thereabouts. A vulnerability is a weakness or a flaw in a system, a software bug, a misconfiguration, the person didn't set it well, a weak setting that could let an attacker in. Anything that we can enter in through that could let an attacker in. Examples include outdated software, service configured with weak settings, a password that is easy to guess. Key idea is a vulnerability is a weakness itself. It is something exploitable, right? So what is now an exploit? It is the technique, the code, or method used to take advantage of a vulnerable system that typically triggers that weakness that the system has. Does that make sense? So a vulnerability is the weakness or a flaw. The exploitation is using an exploit against that vulnerable system. An exploit can be a tool, a script, a manual technique performed hand by hand, step by step, right? Or even ready-made. You can create your own exploits. Exploits are just things to prove that, yes, that vulnerability is a weakness in that system. Do you understand? So I told you concept 2 and concept 3 are more practical than they are, theoretical. So in a more practical class, you'd be able to see these things actually happening in real time. That's the reconnaissance aspect of it, and then the vulnerability that they have, the vulnerabilities that they have. So understanding virtual machine exploitation is the third one we want to really look at. We have our targets. We have seen the vulnerabilities, that's its weaknesses. We found an exploit, that if we put this exploit into this vulnerability, we would get initial access. And not just initial access, but more access than we should typically be getting. Does that make sense? Moving on. So you find the weakness, you use the right method, emphasis on the word right, because you could also use the wrong method to try to exploit a vulnerability, a weakness, and then you gain a foothold, you gain like a steadiness into that system. So how do you get from target to foothold? Just like we've mentioned before, you identify the virtual machine, or in another case, a web service, but in this case, a virtual machine. You confirm the lab target, you perform reconnaissance, you're scanning the network, you're scanning the machine, you're scanning the information that they have, perform reconnaissance, you spot the vulnerabilities. You see things that you can, after much trial and error, and even just growing yourself as a penetration tester, some things will just stand out to you very clearly that, oh, this is already a weakness. But you spot those vulnerabilities, you find interesting flaws, you exploit them using the right methods, the ones that are most curated for this system. You gain access, right? That's a foothold into the system. And then post-exploitation includes the assessing and documenting everything else that happened between stages 1 to 5. So VM exploitation in action typically results like this. As I said before, identifying the VM, scanning and recon, finding a flaw, exploiting that flaw, and explaining the results. Just as I said before. So what to remember from today? Penetration testing is authorized testing, right? It is not just testing. You're not just testing any system to do whatever you feel like. It is something you have been given access to do. But there are definitely labs and people who have put out things that it's like, yo, try and hack me. And that's where the practical aspects of this class comes in. But that will be for another time, as I said before. You simulate attacks that prove the weaknesses with permission. Reconnaissance comes first. You can't start exploiting your system. You first have to search what they have. I mean, you can start exploiting your system. With this information that you get from reconnaissance, you have a better understanding of what more you can do. Then you need to understand, just as we explained earlier, that vulnerabilities and exploits are two different things. A weakness is not the same as the method used to trigger it. A weakness is a vulnerability, the method used on exploit. Exploitation gives you access, right? You have your targets, you have a vulnerability. Exploit, then initial access. Exploitation gives you access. Then stay in the scope, always. Authorize and agreed rules are non-negotiable. I mentioned that before with the whole Google and Gmail thing. Sorry, YouTube and Gmail thing. Then you document and you learn from that. Record what was found and how to fix it. And even after all of that, you grow, you learn, you be better, you learn how better to follow the rules of your authorized tests, how best to follow, how best to work, make sure you want to start looking at the vulnerabilities available and how to exploit them, right? And within these two, you learn new techniques, you learn new tactics, you learn new ways to be more malicious. I mean, you're not actually being malicious, but it's, a phrase you can still use. How to get into more information than necessary. And then thereabouts. So that actually concludes our class today. We're done. I hope you've been able to learn something new. I hope you guys have also been able to learn something new. Very nice to have you here today. And for a more in-depth explanation of these same courses, the same concepts rather, that we've already explained today, and also the practical aspects of it, you would have to tune in later for the practical class happening on Monday and on Wednesday next week. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below on what you understand from today's class. Thank you.